Welcome to mighty Wills Creek, a tributary of the North Branch of the Potomac River, and a body of water which, for centuries, has played a major role in the story of Western Maryland. Although scores of people enjoy Wills Creek each year as a site for fishing, a muse for painting, or a spot to enjoy the beauty of nature, many may be unaware of the significance of this water which flows through and around our community. As water tends to do, it both gives and takes from those who coexist with it. Wills Creek got its name from Wills Town, a former settlement of the Shawnee tribe, which today is the site of the city of Cumberland, a beautiful place nestled in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. The area received its name from European pioneers who dubbed the land in honor of a Shawnee man known as Will to them, who had considerable land claims in and around the creek. Wills Creek also had a recurring significance in the life of someone we all know, the first president of the United States, George Washington. At Wills Creek, Washington witnessed the construction of Fort Cumberland in 1754, commenced and concluded the ill-fated march of General Edward Braddock in 1755, and reviewed militiamen during the Great Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. The city today still maintains General Washington's headquarters, the only remaining piece of the original Fort Cumberland structure. And each year, the city memorializes Washington's contribution through its annual Heritage Days and Whiskey Rebellion festivals. Wills Creek has played a starring role in creating problems for Cumberland, too. In the 1950s, the city of Cumberland and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers embarked upon a massive $20 million flood control project after disastrous floods ravaged our community in 1924, 1936, and 1942. The project, which took a decade to complete, included a sophisticated pumping system installed between walls of concrete, which has kept our city safe ever since. Like the creek itself, the Wills Creek Exhibition of Fine Art has long been part of the landscape here in Allegheny County. The longest-running signature event of the Allegheny Arts Council, the exhibition was named to create a sense of place for this competition that celebrates innovation in contemporary art. And more than 2 decades later, the Wills Creek exhibition remains a place where artists can push the boundaries of what came before, like a mighty creek pushing earth and carving rock, making our world anew. Special thanks to our friends at the Allegheny Museum for historical information. Our program will begin in just a few moments. Good evening and welcome to Dive into the Creek, exploring the 22nd annual Wills Creek Exhibition of Fine Art. We are coming to you live this evening from Facebook and our YouTube channel, both Allegheny Arts Council, and from the beautiful studios of Allegheny Media, our production partner. I'm Julie Westendorf, your host for this evening and Executive Director of the Allegheny Arts Council. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed learning a bit more about our community and the namesake of this competition in our intro video. Today, Wills Creek remains an integral part of our home place, and it is one of the exciting attractions to visit right here in Allegheny County. To learn more about us and to plan a getaway, check out www.mdmountainside.com, where you can explore all that the mountain side of Maryland has to offer. The Seville Gallery is part of the Allegheny Arts Council, a nonprofit organization that serves as one of 24 county arts agencies in the state of Maryland. In addition to fine exhibits like this, our organization provides direct funding to local arts organizations and artists, develop arts engagement and enrichment programs for people of all ages, develops and advocates for public art projects in our community, and promotes economic development through our work as manager of the city's Arts and Entertainment District. Our support is derived from state grant funds, membership, sponsorship, and entry fees. We welcome you to join our growing membership family or support us through a one-time donation. You can learn more about the value of membership at www.AlleghenyArtsCouncil.org/join. Now in its 22nd year, the Wills Creek competition has become one of the signature events of the Allegheny Arts Council, and each year it brings hundreds of entries from artists all across the U.S. Through the years, the competition has included esteemed jurors from the Corcoran Gallery and Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C., the Philadelphia Museum, the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, as well as the Phillips. Last weekend, we presented awards to the winners of this year's competition at our public opening. And despite the ongoing challenges that COVID-19 is presenting, we were pleased for a very good turnout and several artists who were able to attend in person. Tonight, we'll be looking at our awards once more, speaking in greater detail with our 2021 juror, Laura Roulet, give you an opportunity to ask questions, and visit with our Best of Show winner. Through the evening, we welcome your comments and your questions in the chat box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. And later in our program, we will invite any of the artists juried in this year's show to share a bit more about their work as well. We'd like to take a quick moment to thank and congratulate all of the artists who entered this year's competition and the 54 who were ultimately juried into the show. The entries you see in our gallery represent works from 22 states and a number of different mediums as well. And this year, we were incredibly excited to see some really exciting three-dimensional works in the show. I think it's one of our best ones yet. As a reminder, if you live outside of our area, you can still take a look at the exhibition through our digital gallery, which can be found at AlleghenyArtsCouncil.org/Seville Exhibition. The physical exhibit and digital gallery will remain open for viewing through Saturday, October 2nd, so please be sure to spend a few minutes with it. And remember that all of the works are for sale, both online and in person, and the sale of original artistry provides a living for artists all across our nation. I know they and we truly truly appreciate your support. So before we introduce our special guest tonight, I want to take a moment to recognize some very important people whose work and dedication and support make all the difference in bringing together great programs like this one to you. So special thanks to our Wills Creek Planning Committee, who each year solicits important sponsorship funds and works behind the scenes to promote the show and also locate a very talented juror. So congratulations to you. We also want to recognize the powerful support of our largest sponsorship class to date. The individuals and businesses you see on your screen champion the arts right here in Allegheny County and make possible programs which offer competitive prizes to outstanding artists across the nation. And last, a very special thanks to the talented and dedicated team at the Allegheny Arts Council. So I'm really excited this evening to welcome back our 2021 juror, Laura Roulet, whom we had the pleasure of spending some time with last weekend. In particular, Laura took a long time to meet with us and walk through her selections for this year's show, and we were so impressed with the thoughtful way in which she selected award winners, her care in ensuring that the show included a broad spectrum of work, and frankly, the time it takes for any juror to work through hundreds of images to pull a show together. Laura is an independent curator and writer living in the Washington, D.C. area, specializing in contemporary and Latin American art. She was one of 5 international curators chosen for a citywide public art project, 5x5, a major initiative sponsored by the D.C. Commission on the Arts and Humanities in 2012. She has organized exhibits in Mexico, Puerto Rico, and the United States, including at the OAS Art Museum of the Americas, American University, the Mexican Cultural Institute, Hillier Art Space, as well as the DC Art Center. Laura has also curated exhibits for the Brentwood Arts Exchange, American University, the Huntington, West Virginia Museum of Art, and so many others. And she served as the first ever mentoring curator for VisArts in Rockville, Maryland. Laura is a frequent contributor to Sculpture magazine, and she has published many catalog essays and articles in American Art, Art Journal, and Art Nexus. She worked on the Ana Mendieta retrospective, which was organized by the Hirshhorn Museum in 2004 and contributed to that catalog as well. So please join me in welcoming back our 2021 juror, Laura Roulet. Hey, Laura, how are you tonight?
Wonderful.
It's so good to have you. Thanks for taking some time to be with us.
Sure. I had a great time last weekend. Really fun spending time in Cumberland and meeting some of your artists and your staff and the supporters of the gallery.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate having you here. It was a busy weekend. Laura actually got to experience, I understand, our Whiskey Rebellion Festival, Laura. So what did you think about that?
I did. A lot of fun. I feel like I kind of met the in crowd of Cumberland. So that was very special.
That's a fun weekend in our town. There was a lot going on. Both our Heritage Days and Whiskey Rebellion festivals happened last weekend. So I'm glad that we didn't scare you away. Thanks for taking some time with us tonight. I wanted to take a little bit of time before we move into the Wills Creek portion of our program tonight and talk with you about what is really an incredible body of work as a curator and a writer that you have put together through the years. And I read that your focus in particular is on contemporary and Latin American art. I was wondering if you might share a little bit with our viewers about what drew you in particular to those areas.
Well, I grew up with a lot of contemporary art in my home. My mother was Dean of Students and an art professor at the Cleveland Institute of Art. So that was very familiar territory for me growing up. I became an art historian and I married someone from Puerto Rico. So that plunged me into Latin America in general. We lived in Puerto Rico for 7.5 years, and I got to know Caribbean artists and became really interested in Latin artists and Latinx artists in particular. So I have done a lot of projects along those lines.
Cool. So you shared with us, you were very kind to put together for us tonight some slides. You talked in your bio about one of your curatorial projects. You served as one of 5 international curators for a temporary public art project that was sponsored by the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. And that was a project called 5 by 5. To give our viewers tonight a flavor of what this project was like, the DCAC provided about $500,000 and allowed the curatorial team to select 5 artists or artist teams of their choosing who would create a series of temporary public art installations across the city. So in particular, this project was interesting to me because our community is in the early stages of developing a public art master plan. And just next week, in fact, we will launch our first ever temporary public art installation as well. So when I read about this project, the focus was to underscore areas in DC that were really ripe for development and revitalization, which is a really big topic here in Appalachia. So I'm curious, what was your experience like in a curator in that project? And also, just in general, what are your thoughts on the impact that public art has on a community?
Well, thanks for bringing up 5 by 5. It was one of my favorite projects to work on. It was a curator-driven project where the 5 curators were chosen on the basis of their proposals. Mine was called Activate, Participate, and all of the projects were just ephemeral, temporary public art projects. I proposed projects that used mostly almost all local artists based in the DC area, except I brought in 1 Puerto Rican, and I used all 8 wards of DC. So all of the projects were intended to be participatory. So on the upper left there, you see we built a skateboard park. That was Ben Ashworth. So he insisted on this particular highway underpass, and it was very complicated to find out in DC exactly who controls this space so that we could get a permit. But we built a, uh, a, a slide there, various elements of a skateboard part that he wanted to include. And we also did a workshop with some of those little adorable kids that you see and help them to make their own skateboards and teach them how to skateboard. And so this was on Capitol Hill. The one over on the right next to it is called the Floating Lab Collective. They were a collective based out at George Mason University, and their project was involving sort of what creates value of an object, collecting people's stories about objects that they treasured, and kind of working with the museum. It was partly at the Corcoran Museum, it was partly out in the community, about sort of answering questions like, why do certain objects end up in museums and most don't? What makes something valuable? What makes something an heirloom? Or what makes something really important to your family or to you personally? So we did oral histories, we went out and talked to people, we collected objects, we cast them, we blew them up, we sent them back out into the community. It was pretty complicated, but that was involved also much of the swath of DC neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
Below the Floating Lab Collective was is a performance artist named Wilmer Wilson IV. And he was still an undergraduate at Howard University when I heard about him. And after talking to him and hearing his ideas, I selected him to do a 3-day performance. So not everyone even knows what performance art is, much less thinks of it as public art. But in this case, we selected 3 different neighborhoods in DC where he would spend an entire morning covering himself completely with postage stamps, and then would walk to a local post office that we had scouted out ahead of time, ask to be mailed, and then he was refused each time and returned to another space and peeled off his stamps. So this was called Henry Box Brown Forever. And Henry Box Brown is a real historic figure. He was a slave in Richmond, Virginia, who did actually have himself crated up in a box and mailed to Philadelphia.
Wow.
So he successfully freed himself. And Wilmer had grown up in Richmond and knew about this story and this true history. And so he kind of brilliantly conceived of a public art project to use that story. In the bottom left corner is the Puerto Rican artist Charles Juhas Alvarado. He created a sound sculpture, and so this was outside of Arena Stage in DC, and he built in drum boxes and xylophones. So we had some little concerts there, and we had mallets that were attached to it so that people could play it when they wanted to, anytime they wanted. The project in the middle is by Patrick McDonough, and it was a geocaching project. So it was more technically complicated than it looks there. It looks like a pile of rocks. And we did, in fact, have piles of rocks sort of hidden in all 8 wards. And so you had to download, this geocaching instruction to find the stones, and you could collect them. So if you collected all 8, you got a certificate from Patrick.
Super
So
cool.
the idea was to take people to places in DC that they had never been before, to explore it, to kind of activate all parts of DC.
Wow, what a cool project. I love the participatory aspect of it and just the fact that it was unexpected, which is so fun. So tell me a little bit for our community, because we're kind of starting to have this conversation about public art here in our community. What would you say to a rural community like ours about the value of public art?
Well, I recommend the direction that the DC Commission took with this project. So all of the projects were ephemeral. None of them lasted more than a couple of months.
Hmm.
Some were performances that were only one day. And DC has a lot of monuments, as you may know. And the idea was that that's not what public art is really about. It's about public, the people. And so this should be something that creates maybe a temporary community. The idea of social practice is to make the experience the artwork. So that's what we did.
Yeah, it's so special, and I think people really connect and engage. I love the name that you gave, Activate, because it really activated the people, it activated the space. Just I went a little bit down the rabbit hole in reading about this project, but it was so fun, and what an honor for you, and what an incredible thing to look back on and know that you got to be a significant part of that. So you shared with us some other projects getting a little closer to our current time period, the experience that we've all had these past 8 months with COVID-19. I know it has certainly changed our perspective on the way that we do our work and how we engage with our audiences. And I'm sure for all of us, it has deeply impacted us as people and humans. Last fall, you got to work on a show called Mothering in a World Turned Upside Down. And that exhibit did a visual exploration of the experience of motherhood during a time of really intense social and physical and economic crisis. So I wondered, what impact do you think that a time of widespread but really collective experience has on our experience with art? And would you just share with us, some images and talk a little bit about what that project was like for you?
So I think we have some slides of that. This is an installation shot. So this was last summer when COVID was still fairly new to us. And it was an exhibit that had already been kind of in the calendar. But once COVID and the shutdown happened, I completely changed my whole concept and decided on different new artists. I chose 3 women who are artist mothers. Their children ranged in age from preschool. So right now we're looking mostly at Amy Hughes Braden, who's the mother of a preschooler, up to teens. They were local, and basically I just asked them to keep making art, and that as we got closer to the time of the exhibit, I would do studio visits and select what would work together. So I really wanted just kind of a reflection of what the artists were going through. Maybe we can look at the next slide. This is one of Amy's paintings. It's called Ancestor Portrait. Next slide. This shows the installation of sort of the other half of the gallery. So the works hanging on the left are by Jackie Malad, who does a lot of different interesting kind of collages. She sometimes will cut up previous work, piece it together. She uses mixed media, paper, fabric, painting, embroidery. And on the right is Roxana Aldry-Geffen, who she's the mother of 3 children. She had the oldest children. She is really interested in kind of feminist empowerment of traditional female handicraft. So things like embroidery, sewing, using textiles. Can we see the next slide? That's another installation shot. Next slide. This is Jackie Malad, 2 of her larger pieces. She also chose to paint on the wall as part of her installation. So this was kind of the height of the shutdown in a way, that all along we were expecting to be able to open the gallery and for people to see this in person. And in the end, we only did it online, which was kind of difficult. But we were all happy that we at least had something to work on. So that was of value to all of us. Next slide. This is Roxana's, some of Roxana's pieces. So the coat was a COVID coat. I think all of her pieces were made during the shutdown. Next slide. This is a close-up of the COVID coat. And so you probably recognize some names. These are mostly women of color. She started with George Floyd below the seam there, and then she started to kind of elaborate on this. And it includes some of her friends, some family members, but also famous women like Kara Walker, Harriet Tubman, Nikisha Durrett is an African-American local artist. And so it just kind of like kept growing and turned into a really beautiful sort of time capsule. Next slide. And this was the roller towel. This is a close-up of that. So this was the result of a family discussion that they had of, what happens if, if both you and dad get sick, and just kind of trying to talk out worst case scenarios, which did not happen, but this led to her literally embroidering this kind of list. And I think that all parents can sort of identify with this, trying to reassure your children, but at the same time, having real fear and anxiety yourself. Next slide. That's it.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I looked at that a lot. That was really powerful. And it's hard. And in fact, it's funny because my next sentence says, and in that same vein, we find ourselves still very much in a period of uncertainty. And that's the truth. And that work is really extraordinary. And also, we also had to go through the experience of developing a digital gallery, which we had never had before. It's had all kinds of unintended and exciting benefits and challenges too. But it is somewhat of a different experience. So I'm glad that we got to see those. So speaking of that uncertainty, one of the things that you did for us this year was you took some time to write a juror statement about our Wills Creek show that kind of encapsulated your impressions of the art and the artists themselves. When you sent it to me, I remember just thinking it was really profound. And because of that, we blew it up and put it in our galleries. And I wanted to share it with the folks who are on tonight to just take a quick minute because it really does kind of describe your impressions of the show. And while our viewers are taking a moment to read it, I just want to remind you, if you have a question or comment, please share it with us in the chat feature. But for Laura, for you, how did you see the work in this Wills Creek exhibition as reflective of the current times? And what were kind of the common themes? Was it hope? Was it despair? Was it anxiety? What was your overall thought?
I think that the works that I ended up selecting had certain things in common, that I was looking for work that was reflective of being deep into COVID by now. I mean, we're almost 2 years into this worldwide pandemic. It's impacted everyone's life. And artists, I think, have special skills for observing and maybe recording or analyzing or providing some kind of like window or insight into what is happening. Mm-hmm. It's hard as a historian to comment on right now because we're still in the midst of it. It's not over. We don't have the final, sort of word, but I think that at this point, everyone has been impacted deeply. So that took different forms. I saw a lot of work that dealt with kind of isolation, maybe loneliness. There was some dark work, but there was also work that dealt with nature, either using actual natural materials or like beeswax and bird's feathers. There was a lot of interesting mixed media work. There was also work that could have a climate change aspect to it, mm-hmm. Or that could be read into it. There's also work that seemed to be searching for connection, either connection with nature or with other people, or maybe like mourning the absence of connection.
Yeah, you and I talked the night that you were here about all of the hearts that were in uh, the
Yeah,
exhibit. We
I
just
didn't
kept
even
running across the
realize
hearts
that. I didn't even
over and
realize
over.
that till I was in the gallery, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah, but I mean, it
That's
just
neat.
really speaks to kind of where we have all been for the last 18 months and the things that we're thinking about. So, before we kind of round out this portion with you, I wanted to ask you what's coming up. You've talked a little bit about a photojournalism exhibit that you're pulling together. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think we have some slides of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So this is going to be at the Katzen Center, the American University Museum, and it's using the former Corcoran collection. So the Corcoran was dissolved about 5 years ago, and local museums in Washington have taken over parts of the collection. So the director, Jack Rasmussen, asked me if I had some ideas of what to do with this vast new body of work that they were acquiring. And looking through, I came across two pretty large holdings of two journalists that I did not know of, but I started researching them. And what we're seeing now is a Russian man. He was a photojournalist working in the Battle of Stalingrad.
Hmm.
So both of them, those are Battle of Stalingrad. Let's see the next slide. His name is Georgy Zelma. And so that flamethrower on the left is one of Georgy Zelma's work. And the work on the right is by a woman, Constance Stewart Larrabee. She was South African, and she was, she represented kind of in a freelance way the South African magazine, sort of like Life magazine. And they helped her to get correspondence credentials so that she could jump on a military plane and that she would be kind of like housed and taken care of. But she didn't really have a photojournalism background. Her background was more as a portrait photographer. So she was hired to check out like what was going on with the South African troops, and that is one in North Africa and Egypt. So the next slide. She was in Paris right after it was liberated by the Allies. So she was always kind of honed in on the portrait. And she was really fascinated by the women who had been, suffering so much in Paris during the occupation, the German occupation, and how they were trying to get back to some normal life, normalcy, which could have some parallels with COVID. Next slide. This is, she was one of the photographers who documented the aftermath of the Allied victory, where women who were seen as collaborators with the Germans were publicly shamed. So this is a woman whose hair had been shaved off. So these are women who had been like living with German soldiers, may have had children with them. And this is like the immediate aftermath of the war. So it's pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah, but that last photograph is just really exceptional. And you said that's going to be an American. What is the time frame for that project to come? Will we be able to come and see it?
Thanks to COVID, it's been postponed twice. Right now, we're going to be installing it next winter, and it will open in, I think, January 2023.
Wow. Well, that's exciting. It's really exciting and neat to see kind of that collection from the Corcoran, kind of being reimagined and re-envisioned in a new way. Well, thank you very much for sharing some of the projects and the photographs. We're excited to keep watching your work and see what you're doing next. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and welcome another guest to our show tonight. And as a recap for our listeners, typically the Wills Creek exhibition awards 5 different categories: our Best in Show, first, second, and third place, and an honorable mention. But this year, Laura, you selected two winners in that category. And so we are going to be joined tonight by our Best of Show winner, but we're still going to take a moment and show you the other award winners who could not be with us tonight. So the very first honorable mention award actually goes to a local photographer and a member of the Allegheny Arts Council, which is always cool. Her name is Penny Knoebel Besa, and her piece is called Amish Farm Workers. So Penny is a playwright, a director, a producer, as well as an award-winning photographer. She was once named Maryland's Photographer of the Year. She has also exhibited in Europe and all over the United States. Her work is published in a variety of literary journals, and recently she had several of her photographs that made the cover of a literary journal for the Maryland Writers Association. She prefers to capture random moments as she travels abroad, and she creates work being her computer. She also is well known locally for giving these awesome private sessions, which she calls the art of photography, from her beautiful sanctuary studios in Flintstone, Maryland, where she lives with her artist husband, Hilmar Gottesdahl. So, Laura, I know that you felt this piece was very sweet, and you seem to really, really like it. So talk a little bit about what you like so much about this particular one.
Well, this was one of the ones that I thought was reaching for a connection, talking about human connection. Apparently, it's like a brother and sister, and I liked the way that she was focusing on a gesture. So I sort of suspected a theatrical kind of leaning or background, just the way actors use their bodies to express emotion. She saw that with this two people clasping a metal tool. And so I like the way that she cropped this. I like the tonal values that she was picking up, bringing out, the way she composed this, sort of fragment of life.
Yeah, and Penny was with us last week at our public opening, and she talked a little bit about the experience of being invited into the Amish community, which, as we all know, just does not really happen, and just the incredible trust that was placed in her, and what just a really exceptional experience it was. So congratulations to you, Penny. We're really excited. The second honorable mention that you gave this year, Laura, was presented to another Maryland artist by the name of Paula Sano from Hagerstown, Maryland, for a piece that she calls The New Face. Paula's acrylic on canvas made a big impression on you, I know, and although she was unable to join us tonight, she did attend last week and talked about this work and what it means to her. She often explores topics related to the fragility of life, illness, self-objectification, and social influences. And her work has been exhibited in DC, New York, Chicago, as well as the Dominican Republic. She received a Maryland State Arts Council Independent Artist Award and an Elizabeth Greenshields Foundation grant. She graduated from the Parsons School of Design in New York. And I would love to hear from you on this particular piece called The New Face.
Well, this one seems to more directly reference our current masking situation. I like the surreal quality of the painting. It's in a technique called grisaille, where you're using all different tones of gray paint. So it has a sort of historic, timeless quality to it. The mask that this woman is wearing references the kind of medieval Renaissance plague masks that were worn by the doctors of the time, that were very like bird-like, and it seems to be combined with kind of a gas mask. So it has a disconcerting, surreal quality, but it also has a sort of poignance to it that I liked a lot.
Yeah, and she talked a lot about being a mother and how this COVID thing and this, fear of illness has kind of impacted her and her family. It's a really stunning piece in person. So, congratulations, Paula, to you. So, our third place award was presented to a Tucson, Arizona based artist for also the heaviest work in the show, Forged Steel and Willow, in a really beautiful piece called Bound Cyclical. The artist, Zach Lyhatch, is a designer and blacksmith who has exhibited, worked, and lectured at the Estonian Academy of Art and at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, as well as the Appalachian Center for Craft and the Penland School of Craft in North Carolina. He also has public art commissions that can be seen in Tucson, as well as in Sweden. So, Laura, talk to us a little bit about this particular piece and what drew you to it.
It's a strong work of sculpture. I like the sort of tension between the forged steel and the willow that he uses. It reminded me of some other sculptors who have this kind of combination, this contradiction and tension between organic and inorganic. It has a lot of energy. It's dynamic. It's hard to tell the scale, so everyone has to really go to the gallery and see it in person. But it's a beautiful piece.
Yeah, it really is. It's stunning in the gallery, and it's also sold already. So congratulations to Zach for that. So our second place award winner is a painter who captured a really unique and interesting view of a landscape. He is a Columbia City, Indiana-based artist. Nathan Taves received an award for his piece called Wheatfield Falls. Ironically enough, Nathan worked as a cartographer in a municipal civil engineering department where aerial photography, blueprints, and surveys were a part of his work. And then many years later, he shifted gears entirely and bought a retail shop and gallery. And then he published a book on decorative glass. And at that point in his career, he decided that he was going to go back to school and earn both his bachelor's and master's degrees in art, which I thought was pretty cool because it's never too late to be passionate about something. So, Laura, we spent a lot of time looking at this piece in the gallery, and it has some interesting things to say. So, talk to us a little bit about this one.
Well, it might be a little hard to tell from a small image, but in the upper left corner is an upside down cow. And so that's the first clue that he is playing around with our sense of space, with pictorial space. I guess it doesn't surprise me that he has some cartography in the background. He flips perspective several times. To me, this is kind of like virtuoso painting, or maybe kind of improvisational, that he's showing us I can do realism, but I can also do abstraction. And the lower right hand corner is a really beautiful sort of abstract passage, but you also have naturalistic parts and reflections. And it reminded me of a painter named Mark Tansey, who also kind of plays around a lot with pictorial space.
Yeah, it's a really lovely piece. Congratulations, Nathan. So 2 awards left. Our first place prize this year went to an artist from Boise, Idaho for a photograph. And he captured an image that in some ways is very familiar to all of us. The photograph was called No Dumping, and while small in size, it had created a lot of conversation in our gallery. It is by a gentleman named Mr. Hao Zhang. Mr. Zhang has a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Washington State University and an MFA from Boise State. And his artistic practices focus often on the conflicts between humans and the wounds that are brought by rapid urbanization. So, Laura, you spent a lot of time talking to us about this particular piece. So tell our viewers a little bit about it.
Well, it reminded me it's a small scale photo. It's probably like, I don't know, 10 by 12. But it reminded me of some of the German photographers, like Andreas Gursky, who did photos on a very large scale. And I can just imagine this, blown up. It would have a very similar effect, that he has a really good eye as a photographer. So the way that he composed this is just using a found, urban scape that we all recognize. It could be anywhere, but he sort of constructs it almost with different rectangles and receding space, the patterning of the bricks, the patterning of the mortars, the other built parts of the city, the landscape that he sees here. But the kicker is really the the surveillance sign, reminding us all of what we experience constantly, of being surveyed, filmed, videoed on camera, like right now. So these are some of the elements of what we might call contemplating post-capitalist society or late-stage capitalism. That it's a kind of gloomy dystopian view, but it's one that we are very familiar with.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot of notice in the gallery since you gave it an award. So congratulations to you. So our last award, our Best in Show winner, is actually with us tonight, and she is a former Sparks, Maryland, now Buffalo, New York-based artist who did an extraordinary accordion-style book called Watch. Alice Valenti works in oil paint and mixed water-based medium. Her works are generally labor-intensive. I would count this among those, illusory and abstract, and inspired by fragments of visual memory. Alice earned an MFA from Towson University and a BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art. She has received several awards, including an Elizabeth Greenshields Foundation grant, and her works are found in the collections at Johns Hopkins Hospital and the State University of New York. Alice has also taught fine arts and design in Maryland and exhibits nationally. So congratulations to you, Alice, and welcome. Laura, before we turn it over to Alice and let her talk about the piece, will you explain to us why you selected this one for our highest prize this year?
Well, this definitely, I thought, reflected our current state of being and the COVID shutdown. It expresses a sort of mood of isolation and loneliness, but it has a lot of implied narrative in a kind of like Hopper-like way, that there are no figures, but we can imagine a story that goes with each page. It's arranged as an accordion book, but it also works as like sort of a portfolio of drawings. There's a lot of really beautiful texture. Technically, it's very accomplished. She has this really delicate way of adding in a little color with watercolor. It sort of moves from outside to inside a building. It's a kind of enclosed domestic space, but then it opens up to the outside world, to nature. It becomes increasingly abstract. So there's a sort of progression in the images and the kind of narrative that you can read into it. It definitely is a work that you can spend a lot of time with, and I hope that by having it in the gallery, people will be able to do that. And I would love to hear from the artist.
Hi, thanks.
Hey, Alice.
Yeah, hi, thanks a lot. So as you said, Laura, the project kind of has two components and they're related. On the one hand, I think of it as a suite of drawings. And on the other, I think of it as a sequential book. So my idea in presenting the images within the accordion book format was to show the drawings kind of both as a potential narrative, potentially sequential, but also removable and changeable. And then also simultaneously as a single collection, as you said, kind of like a portfolio. The drawings were created in layers. I do work labor intensively, and I'm using a process of layering graphite and water media to create an opaque kind of surface. So the layering process is a sort of intuitive calibration. In the studio, I'm building the density of the surface until it feels a bit impenetrable. And I really like that for the drawings, to kind of feel like you can't quite enter them. The surface has a density that is just a little bit impermeable. And the imagery relates to the threshold time between day and night. It was originally inspired by a pre-industrial concept, the time of day called shutting in, which is when shutters and doors would have been bolted against oncoming darkness. And that time would change with the seasons and the length of the day. So it was a sort of experiential time of day rather than a time of day that relates to like the clock. So a pre-industrial understanding of human experience within the environment. And I began the work prior to the pandemic. And so it is strange that we sort of ended up like literally living this project as I was completing it during lockdown. That was sort of my odd experience of finishing up the work. I'd lived it kind of in my mind. It was psychological, and then suddenly it became literal and also sort of collectively literal. So yeah, that's it.
Well, it's really beautiful. It has such a great presence in the gallery, and it's actually located right up front as you walk in the door. So it's just really quite lovely. Congratulations to you, Alice. We hope to see you back in some of our other competitions.
Thank you.
So congratulations are once again in order to all the winners of this year's Wills Creek competition. And at this point in tonight's program, we'd like to hold some space and invite our viewers to share with us any thoughts that you have, perspectives on the show. If we have other artists who were juried in to the competition with us tonight, we also welcome you to share about your work. We can actually pull up your digital images on our gallery, or if you have a question for our juror or for Alice, please feel free to jump in. So I'll wait just a moment and see what we have. Okay, so it doesn't sound like we have any questions tonight. So before we close out this evening, I want to ask you to make note of our 23rd annual Wills Creek competition, which will be taking place September 3rd through the 24th of next year. And if you'd like to keep up with our calls for entry, you can do so by subscribing to our newsletter online at AlleghenyArtsCouncil.org. And finally, if you are an artist with interest in exhibiting in our galleries, you'd like to make a donation or join our membership family, please check us out at AlleghenyArtsCouncil.org to stay up to date on our activities, events, and programs. Thank you once again to our 2021 juror, Laura Relay. You have been a pleasure to work with. We hope to see you again. And congratulations to Alice and all of the invited artists for making this 22nd annual Wills Creek one of the best. Thanks so much for joining us, and good night.